When I first started working in accessibility, I was working only with blind people. Now that's not true anymore. We work with deaf people, blind people, people with mobility impairments, learning disabilities, all sorts of stuff. And I love it. I love every minute of it. But when I first started out working only with blind people, I didn't have context for all these other groups yet. And so I sort of naively, I think, assumed that when you add support for one group for accessibility, that mostly impacts that group. But I know with certainty that is not true. And I'll give you a few examples. If you have people that are blind or visually impaired, they use the keyboard very heavily because you can't see the screen. You wouldn't use a mouse. That makes no sense, right? I mean, some people that are blind can also see. That's complicated, but never mind that. I even have a student that is blind, legally blind, but can drive, but never mind that. Depends on the state. And since they're using the keyboard heavily, because they're very used to it, if the keyboard shortcuts are really nasty, it will get very annoying very fast. So if you're blind, it's important to be able to remap keys to sort of whatever is kind of convenient to make sure they follow standards, don't conflict with screen reader keys and stuff like that. However, if you have a mobility impairment, you must be able to remap the keys. Like you just have to, otherwise you really can't use the product. In addition, you might think that if you have closed captioning for a video, that only impacts the deaf. But actually, that's not true at all. And it impacts parents. If you have closed captioning and you want to turn the sound off because your little kids are asleep, you might want to read it. Or if you're in a hotel or something, or at an airport or whatever it is. In addition, people that are blind often download closed captions so they can read the transcript with their screen reader at higher speed. Because waiting for the video can sometimes be very slow, and there might be visual things on screen that don't get shown except maybe in the captions or somewhere else.
Interesting.
Yeah, so a lot of the technologies that you use that are related to disabilities often get used not just by that group, but by other disabilities groups that end up having the same reliance, but also groups that you wouldn't think of, like a parent that just has a screaming kid, or someone in a wheelchair that has a curb cut that they go up. Well, that's going to be used by a woman with a stroller too that has a child. So I think that even though I'd heard these phrases like curb cuts before when I was doing accessibility research, I think that message didn't really hit home until later when I was sitting watching different kinds of groups, like watching a kid with dyslexia use a screen reader and things like that.
This excerpt was from episode 27 of the CSK8 podcast, and it was titled Accessible CS Education Through Evidence-Based Programming Languages with Andreas Stefik. You can listen to this full interview as well as hundreds more by searching for the CSK8 podcast on your favorite podcast app or by simply going to jaredoleary.com.